this meeting by bringing attention of everybody to the calendar. The calendar very clearly describes the dates of all of our school committee and subcommittee meetings for the next couple of months, and also describes the dates and locations for the conversations with the superintendent at various of our K through 8 schools. And finally, I will mention, probably for the last time, certainly for the last time, that you still have an opportunity to purchase one or more tickets for the 21st Century Fund Gala, which is on November 16th, coming rapidly up, like this Saturday. That being the case, I would accept a motion for the consent agenda, which, just to alert everybody, does not include the minutes of last week because they're not ready yet. Thank you very much, Ms. Chalupsky. But nobody's seconding it. Oh, thank you very much, Ms. Stone. Okay. All those in favor of the consent agenda, please raise your hand. All those opposed, please raise your hand. It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Ms. Kershaw, if you've caught your breath, do you have anything to say regarding finance?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Finance Subcommittee has not met since our last school committee meeting, but we will be meeting on Monday, November 18th, this coming Monday. And just to note for the committee members that we will have an 8:15 start, early start. And the primary agenda item will be the FY15 budget guidelines. And you should expect to see a draft, and I'll bring one to the committee for you and any members of the public there as well on Monday. And if all goes well, we hope to anticipate a vote on those and then bring those to the school committee at our next meeting.
Great. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Kershaw. Ms. Chalupsky, any capital improvements going on?
Just a few. Not a whole lot right now. We'll have more in the future. However, I wanted to apologize to the committee about having to cancel the meeting at the last minute. It became apparent that the greater part of our discussion was going to be the CIP, which wasn't ready for us to discuss. So I hope that everybody got the notice in time. I was a little worried about that. That being said, as soon as we do have that, or I will, as soon as I can figure out the next possible date, together with you guys who are on the committee, we will have another meeting. We will have a meeting. In addition, at the Building Commission last night, just a couple of quick updates. The Unified Arts Building is going along very well. You know what? Why don't you talk about the, or do you want me to? I have the notes.
You can go ahead and do your notes and then I'll fill in.
Okay, this is going to be real quick. It's been going very well. The masonry work is finished for what they have to date specified. There may be need for some more work that would be done in the spring, but that's not right now. Right now, they're just finishing up the work that they have there, and they've taken down some of the staging, and it could be taking down the rest. There is a change order for $2,200 that you hopefully will be signing, having to do with some of the changes in, it's the change order here. For Titan Roofing, for patching limestone band and smokestacks and sealant, stuff that you really want to know about, but it's $2,200, so it's okay. We're in budget, and there's still some budget left to do these other pointing that Tony feels is really important to do. That's all I have about that.
The roofing the rest of the work for the fall, including completion of the slate roof, will be done by the end of the month.
Right, and that they've all, Tony has said that he's been very pleased with the quality of the work of everybody there. One small little item about the town hall garage, there's a grassy area next to the Pierce School that's been sealed off, so to speak, fenced off. And that's sort of been our policy, if people do ask you, that we try and let 2 growing seasons happen before we let kids go onto grass that was seeded, because otherwise we get mud and no grass. So if there's been some complaints about it from parents who want the green space, and I understand that very well, but we've found in general that if we let it grow for 2 seasons, we have a much better chance of having something there for the future. Pierce School Auditorium?
Is absolutely beautiful. I was able to go over there yesterday. I've heard from just a couple of people who have also been using it. There's a Fiddler on the Roof, I believe, is going up in the new auditorium, the first show in the refurbished auditorium, and I think everybody so far is extraordinarily pleased, and certainly pleased to have the auditorium back. But it really is lovely. They did a great job, and the new catwalks are, I think, are going to be very well. I mean, the whole room is just better. It looks safer. It feels better. I haven't heard the sound system yet. I assume that will be better. So that's a success story so far. Our two projects at Pierce, the amphitheater and the auditorium, have gone really, really well and turned out well for the school. So really pleased with that.
So the next issue is the Lawrence Modulars.
I know that yesterday there was a walkthrough of potential bidders. Apparently, we had quite a number of folks show up for that walkthrough, and I think bids are due on December
5th.
5th?
No, 11th.
11th. I was going to say, I thought it was the 11th. And then we assume we will have there will be a review committee and then contract by January 8th, I believe.
Right. And just to remind people, we are going to be leasing these units to buy them, so it will be a 5-year lease. And it's the reason that we need this committee, unlike other, we have a committee of 7, we choose whoever it is, and then that's it, and then the contractors submit their proposals, and we pick the best price. Here it's a little bit different. We have to rank order the proposals, both to their quality and then to price, and then this 5-person committee that Rebecca will be on will determine how much, which agent, because the people who are bidding on it aren't actually even the contractors or the company that makes the modulars. It's a whole new world. I didn't understand all of this beforehand, so I'm just educating you along with me. Probably more than what you want to know about it, but this is the way that it has to be done. So that's Lawrence. We do need to have.
Just the committee, the committee that needs to be constituted is a town committee with finance. There's a member of the building commission, member of the school committee.
Principal, purchasing, and one other.
Right.
Oh, I
It needs
can't
to, because it's a 5-year commitment for a lease, and so the whole finance piece comes in some way.
Right, thank you. Thank you for that. I do need 2 committees of 7 volunteers.
One more thing, that it's a 5-year lease with a $1 remainder payment at the end of it. So in effect, it's a purchase.
Yeah, I thought that's what I said.
That is probably what you said.
Okay, that's all right.
Didn't know about the $1 price.
That part I wasn't aware.
Right.
Yeah, that wasn't the high point. It was more the cost to get there. Was there anything else you wanted to say before I start? We have 2 committees of 7. One for the old Lincoln School to find an architect. That's going out into the registry, I think, this week. And 2 for Pierce School for the electrical system. Apparently, there are parts to the electrical system that you can't find the parts anymore. The electrical system is so old that you can't find the parts anymore. I think it's the original one. And so therefore, we need to change out certain things to the tune, I think, of about $350,000. And so we need a committee of 7 to pick an engineer, I guess, to do that. I'm not going to take time now, but I did send out something to the capital subcommittee. If you guys can get back to me first, and then if anybody else, oh, you have, okay, I hadn't seen my email. If anybody else is interested on the committee to have the experience of a committee of 7, please let me know. And that, I think, and we're going to MSBA on Wednesday, the 20th, to hopefully have a positive response from them on the devotion school. I think that's it, unless anybody has anything else to add. Yes. Yes.
They will
The
be
board
voting
will
to
vote
move us
to-
to design?
It's actually in my report.
Oh, I'm sorry, great.
That's okay.
Thank you for that.
I can comment on here.
I didn't mean to
The-
step on toes.
That's okay if you didn't, fine. The vote, so we had a meeting,
It's the new technology.
we had a telephone meeting with staff, MSBA staff. And we've talked through the number on devotion. They will be recommending a move to the 5-section model, which is actually by their modeling, 1,010 students. That will be their recommendation to the board, and we anticipate that that will go positively when we meet that day. And yes, there will be a vote. And that will allow the project to move forward to next steps.
I just had one other piece, because people may wonder what's happening. There is a contract out for elevator repairs at the Pierce and the Lawrence School. So just so that you know, if you see people messing around on the elevators, that's what,
Not at the town hall?
there's one other, I can't remember what the third one was, but it wasn't Town Hall.
There were repairs recently at Lincoln as well.
Maybe that's what it is, okay. That's all.
Thank you, Ms. Jalewski. Are there any questions for Ms. Jalewski? Okay. Ms. Scotto, curriculum.
Not much to report. Tuesday, December 10th at 10:30, we will be meeting the curriculum committee, and we will be talking about the strategic plan. And on Thursday, December 19th at 4:45 will be our first school improvement plan presentation. I'm not sure what schools will be reporting at this point, but we will be meeting then.
What's the time on December 10th?
December 10th is 10:30 a.m.
Thank you, Ms. Scotto. Very efficient. Appreciate it. Ms. Stone, do you have anything to report on government relations?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm so pleased to report that we just had a Government Relations Subcommittee meeting before the full committee meeting this evening, and went over a discussion draft of legislative potential priorities to talk about with our legislators at our January meeting. Rising to the top this year seemed to be continued discussion of mandate relief, which has several things underneath it that we will be developing. The continuing press on the legislation that's been introduced on our behalf to move to have private insurance rather than school districts pay for medically mandated services in IEPs. And we also want to talk about, we have a new sort of umbrella issue around around reductions in grants and other supports from the state that cause the district to have to make changes in its significant changes or potentially changes in its program. And we want to talk about, in that regard, early childhood and kindergarten in particular. As the grants go down, the pressure for full day and charging, and also Metco, which is a similar kind of pressure on us as the support for that from the state comes down. And finally, we want to continue talking about circuit breaker. We have brought that up in two different ways each year. Certainly raising the reimbursement level, or lowering the trigger mechanism, and in particular pressing for transportation to be included in the calculation of our reimbursement through the circuit breaker for special education. As you all are well aware, circuit breaker reimburses us for 75% of a certain amount over and above high-cost special needs placements and services, but any transportation to take children out of the district to private placements is covered 100% by the district. And we've been urging for years to have the transportation added to the circuit breaker calculation. They have resisted, but there's been a little bit of movement on it, and Senator Cream in particular has been terrific each year in at least trying to get that raised as an amendment. But we have, and there are several other potentially legislative policy priorities that we may or may not want to mention. We're doing some further research on them and hope to bring you a first read document. We didn't determine which committee meeting we were going to aim for, but I think early in December. So we can do a first read and then move the priorities out to our legislators in time for, because I think our breakfast is January 10th, 11th.
We have one meeting before.
Right.
In January.
So we will certainly have a first read document for our next full school committee meeting, I hope.
Okay, any questions for Ms. Stone? Does everybody have that breakfast on their calendar? That's important. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Stone, and now we have some real work to do. Ms. Stone.
On negotiations, there is nothing to report except that we will be participating in a meeting with the Override Study Committee subcommittee. I don't even know which of their task forces or subcommittees it is. What is it called?
It is,
Negotiations,
it is,
Personnel and benefits, to talk about our collective bargaining process and about the structure of the
Program
teacher
task.
contract, which they are interested in learning about.
Really? You're talking about the program?
we are,
Oh, the
Right.
program test? Oh.
yes,
The program task force?
yes,
Oh, you're gonna do it again then? So
on Friday the 22nd.
We should invite them. Yes. Yes, we're all set.
You're all set? Okay. I'll just show up, and as long as you guys know which groups are meeting, we'll show up and talk to anyone of you. Anyway, so that is the extent of my report on negotiations.
Thank you.
Oh, right. Okay. So on policy review,
That's what I was referring to. Right?
we do have real work to do. So two things on policy review. Last week, you will recall that we had a first reading of the proposed amendments to the bullying prevention policy. These are more or less housekeeping amendments to respond to legislation that came down that said that the bullying prevention policy, which is about bullying of students, but in the past bullying legislation only accounted for bullying of students by students. The new legislation said that our bullying prevention policy had to also account for bullying of students by adults, not parents, but teachers and staff. in the schools, and so we have revised the bullying prevention policy to reflect that. It's essentially just a lot of language that adds to the line of who's responsible for investigation and reporting and all of those. It used to be the principal headmaster or the superintendent and her designee. In all cases where it used to say that, it now will read the superintendent, the principal, headmaster, superintendent, or school committee, or a designee for who, as appropriate, in each of the cases. And we read through it last time. There were no questions. There were no substantive changes. Town council has done a review and done a couple of, again, very small changes, no substance at all. And so I move this for a vote.
So we have a motion. Is there a second? Ms. Cox, thank you very much. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. All those vote for the second reading of this document, please raise your hand.
We voted to pass the revisions.
To pass the revisions, which are in this document?
Yes, they are.
That's what I meant. Okay, thanks. Okay. The way I see it, it was a unanimous vote.
Thank you all for that. And I mentioned last week, but I want to say again, because today the notice actually went out, that on Monday, November 25th at 7 p.m. in this room, there will be a public hearing of the subcommittee, the Policy Review Subcommittee, to receive public comment on proposed revisions to our policy on, okay, I'm going to get this, on proof of residency, Section J1A3, which pertains to residences intersected by the town line. There are several on the periphery of Brookline. There are several properties, both single-family and multifamily dwellings, which are intersected by the town line, and so the actual residences belong both to a piece of Brookline and a piece of either Newton or Boston, depending on where the boundary is. Those properties have been ruled by our prior policy, which said that actually after we amended the policy in 2005, which you also have a copy of, and people will be getting a copy of when they get this notice, that said that before 2005, if your dwelling had been intersected by a town line by any proportion, you were eligible to enroll in the public schools of Brookline. Enroll your children in the public schools of Brookline. In 2005, any properties built or altered after that date, after 2005, had to meet the requirement of paying 50% of, that 50% of the dwelling had to be assessed for property taxes within Brookline. So we had we had residences that were operating under two very different rules in terms of what qualified as right to enroll in the public schools. In an attempt to bring this into line with the policies of our other town departments that also deal with what is a Brookline residence and what isn't, which is the town clerk's office and the assessor's office, we have amended our policy and are proposing, and again, we have not, the subcommittee is the only place this has been discussed. We are not ready to bring this to the full committee yet because we wanted to have a public hearing on this proposal before we brought it for a first reading. But the proposal is to change the policy so that all intersected houses will, or dwellings, excuse me, to be eligible for enrollment in the public schools of Brookline, a dwelling would have to both be vetted by the town clerk as belonging to the town of Brookline for the purpose of voter registration, and be assessed by the town of Brookline on at least 50% of the dwelling unit based on the gross building area, which is the tax assessor's basis. So, so we will essentially be looking at all of these properties and realigning them with a new policy, if we in fact do propose this. The notice has gone out to all those dwellings. Now, we do have about 50 children in the public schools right now who live in intersected properties. And all those children, this is very important, no child currently enrolled or the future or younger siblings of those children will be expelled or asked to leave on the basis of this. Everybody who is currently enrolled and their families will be grandfathered. The property itself will not be grandfathered. And so when it changes hands, it would change its designation as public schools eligible or not. So that's the proposal that we are seeking public response to, and those, as I said, those paper notices went out to all affected properties and property owners today, and we'll be putting this out electronically on Monday, and hope to hear from the public about this.
Or maybe not.
We always hope to hear from the public. It means they're paying attention. And that is my report. Oh, except we meet, so that's the 25th, and then our next committee meeting after that is December 11th? It's in the calendar. Yes, December 11th.
And what time is the public hearing again, please?
7 p.m.
Thank you very much, Ms. Stone. I see that Mr. Pollack might have a question.
Have the property-by-property impacts of the change been explored, and sort of, are there, like, is there a big apartment building somewhere where there's a lot of change status, or?
We have not finished, the tax assessors are actually helping us with the potential change in status. And we will have a grid, we will have a map at the public hearing for people to see, and a list of all, obviously the list of all properties we have, because we've sent it notice out to those people. But the most important impact for most people is that their children will still be able to attend if they are currently here, and we will be able to say whether or not, I believe we will be able to say by the time of the public hearing for each property whether or not its status would change. But there are also things that can change within a property that can change its status, even with those designations.
Other questions? Okay, thanks for the update, Ms. Stone. Ms. Ditkoff, the Override Study Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll start, and maybe Ben, if Mr. Chang, if he's interested, will chime in as our liaison. So the Override Study Committee has met a couple times since, at least I was last here, and giving an update. Last night there was a meeting for about 2.5 hours that if anyone missed, I would encourage you to watch when the BATV link is live. It was a fairly substantive discussion of a couple things. One, Sean Cronin from the towns, on the town side, gave the forward-looking operating projections and structural deficit going forward. So we've been talking a lot about capital and B-space and whatnot, but we have not, before last night, looked comprehensively at the operating implications. So Sean did that for the town side, and Bill and Peter did it for the school side, and I think put numbers to many of the things that we've been talking about for quite some time, which were the fact that although we've been doing a very good job of keeping up with classroom teachers, and the specials directly linked to the classroom teachers, the catch-up needed for nursing, guidance, OT-PT, a whole variety of other support, student-centered supports, staff, have not kept up, nor has many of the central administration pieces. So those were quantified. and described in detail. There was I would say a fairly detailed discussion, questions from the committee, from the Override Study Committee about most of these things. As one example, there was a question that said, well, what savings have you seen from X? And, well, we don't necessarily quantify savings in that way. What was clear is that there are calculations one could do that would quantify savings. So, for example, a cost we didn't incur because we did something. And the example, at least that sprung to my mind, was on out-of-district placements, and Dr. Schmuckler provided her expertise. But essentially, the fact that our even though our population has grown between 30 and 35% at the K-8 schools, our out-of-district placements have stayed flat, and at an average of 80 to 90,000, 80,000, what was the number? Average out-of-district cost. So the fact that our number stayed flat at 85 students, more or less, over the last number of years since before our, I guess it was 2007 or 8, that number didn't grow by 30%, and had it, and you multiply that by 80,000 per student, that is a savings we did, I mean, it's a cost we did not incur. And so can one tie it back to any one specific program? I don't think anybody felt comfortable doing that, but sort of thinking holistically about how these pieces move together. What was clear is that it was sort of an education process for the Override Study Committee to watch the various pieces. So it wasn't just first and second grade paraprofessionals. It wasn't just X, Y, or Z. It was a whole constellation of things. It was it was district-wide programs, and anyway, many, many factors, and not disincluding luck. So I would encourage anybody who's interested in particular in those numbers to take a look at both the presentation and the BATV link in particular, which will be available from the Override Study Committee website. The second thing I'll know is we're on a little bit of a hiatus because of town meeting and Thanksgiving, so the next Override Study Committee as a full committee isn't until December 4th. But in the meantime, the subcommittees are very active. So each of I think there are 9 subcommittees, and I would say there's a tremendous amount of detailed work and lifting being done in those subcommittees. So just as a refresher, there are 2 subcommittees on the schools, one of which is focused on the core budget, and the second of which is focused on what used to be known as non-mandated programs, but that's not actually accurate. It was programs that affect population. So it includes METCO, materials fee programs, it includes staff daycare, extended day, early education, because again, there's sort of a mix of mandated and non-mandated in there, so mandated didn't work. But they are programs that affect population. And sort of part of that as well is special education as a unit, again, because there are lots of factors going on. There's a subcommittee on personnel and benefits, which is about collective bargaining and benefit structures and what long-term implications there are there. There's one obviously directly applicable to schools, which is capital. There's one on demographics. So the B-Space Committee, in what it felt was fairly exhaustive detail and was persuasive to many, went through the demographics issue. There are some people on the Override Study Committee who are interested in asking those questions again, and so they are. They're working with Jed, they're working with Linda Pelkey, they're doing all sorts of things. There are a couple other committees, fiscal policies, which is sort of how the town, very spirited arguments about discounted cash flows among people with far too many letters after their name. Then there are revenue committee, which is kind of an interesting one. The revenue one has gotten a little bit of pickup, certainly in the press, and in a lot of interest around town of what other revenue options could or should be, which is always a good discussion to have. There's a municipal committee, town, police, fire, DPW, and I think I'm missing one, but I can't recall it off the top of my head. Anyway, they're all on the Override Study Committee website. You can look at their minutes and whatnot. But they've each met at least 2, 3, 4 times. And I think the big question, speaking in my capacity as the co-chairman, is that there's a certain deadline of March 1st that the selectmen have set out in terms of recommendations for an FY15 budget, implications for an FY15 budget on the operating side. What's become clear, and I think I mentioned this last time, is that there doesn't seem to be a scenario under which any debt exclusions would be ready to go in May anyway. So there aren't any debt exclusions that are being contemplated for the March 1st recommendation. But there is a discussion about whether on an operating point of view, what that number might or might not look like for the March 1 deadline. What that doesn't mean is that the committee will end after March 1st. Certainly, there are a number of analyses that one could imagine doing, or inquiries one could imagine doing, that would take us past the March 1st deadline, that would have longer-term implications. And so I think what we're trying to sort out is, after the subcommittees get their feet under them and figure out where they want to probe, I think we're trying to calibrate across the committees and make sure at the, colloquially, that one committee isn't going down to the $15,000 level and looking at every pen that's bought, and another committee is looking at a $30,000 budget and sort of waving their hands and saying it looks fine. That we're just trying to make sure that there's some parity and consistency across the subcommittees. So that's probably something that we'll visit at the beginning of December, once everyone's at least gotten their first round of interviews done, their first round of inquiry done. Many of you were there. You should all chime in if there were things you heard that were really important. I think it was a tremendous amount of work from the superintendent. The entire senior staff is my guess, although only Dr. Schmuckler and Peter spoke. My guess is that Dr. Fisher-Mueller, Dr. Allen probably had something to do with it as well. But it was clearly a tremendous amount of work to pull together. So I'll leave it at that for now, but Ben, please.
Yeah, I like to add some, impression I gathered during last night's meeting. I want to commend the administration doing a great job in terms of giving the Override Study Committee a quick dive in quite a bit of detail around school budgets, and I thought they made it abundantly clear that we have been under-investing in every aspect of our schools for many years, just because we have to run as fast as we can and stretch the dollars that we have with regards to the increase in enrollment. So again, I thought the team did a terrific job. One thing that I thought caught my attention, and there were a lot of ideas obviously bantered around, was, okay, how about we roll out, or over time catch up, if you will, some of the deficits that we have been experiencing in terms of our school quality and personnel. And I think that's something that we need to keep in mind, because in my mind, unless you put a stake in the ground and say, look, we're going to catch up in an X period of time, we will then perpetually be in a catch-up mode where we never get to where we need to get to. So I think we need to keep that in mind. That struck me as a trial balloon that, I thought was interesting.
Yes, Ms. Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is probably a question for the selectmen, which is the body that actually places any override on the ballot. But I am curious how the Override Study Committee is talking about the timing of a possible override with a recommendation coming March 1st. The override vote, if it were for operating expenses for 2015, would be 2 months later. And that's not even taking into account the selectmen's need to meet and consider whether or not to vote an override, how to structure it, which would push us much later into March, I think, for a decision like that. It's hard to imagine how one does an override campaign of any kind with 6 weeks between an override being placed on the ballot and the override vote happening in town. I'm just curious if the study committee has talked about that timing at all.
It has not.
Thank you, that's very disturbing to hear.
Couple other things. One is, I mean, that timing was the timing we were given in August. And so that's, I mean, we can certainly finish earlier if we chose. Couple of things that we talked about. One is HMFH is coming to the capital subcommittee of the Override Study Committee on the 21st. And so if any of you have questions that have been rattled around in your big brains, God, really?
It's in December now,
Is it moved to December?
December 5th.
It's still in November.
That's what I thought.
All right,
I'm looking at Mr. Rowe, December 5th.
December 5th. Okay, sorry, December 5th. Good, so you have a little more time.
I sent out an email to everybody.
Great. Terrific. Never mind then. The point is that if you have questions that are rattling around in your big smart brains that you want to get into the mix, please get them out of your brains and onto an email. And you can send it to me. You can send it to Lisa, whose email is on the website. She's chairing the capital subcommittee. And CC me, whatever you like. But the point is they're coming, and they're going to be answering questions, and it's probably important for us to get as many of whatever questions we have answered at that point as possible.
Yes, Ms. Chalupsky?
Actually, for the capital questions, it should go to Sergio. He's the one who's collecting them all. That's what they said at the meeting.
Fine. So then Sergio will send them to Lisa. Either way.
No, he's organizing them for them.
Okay, so Lisa's chairing the committee, and
Yes.
Sergio's on the committee. So if he is going to be collecting all the questions.
Yeah,
Fine.
just send them to him, that's all.
Right. Anything you send to an Override Study Committee member, please CC me on. Send it to whoever you want. Please CC me. The second thing I will say is that the number that was presented last night was not in any way inaccurate, but of course, when you absorb 30% more growth in the K-8 schools with not that much more budget, and you defer a bunch of things, that bunch of things gets to be a high number. So the number's high. And that generated while there was not, my last characterization would be that while there was not necessarily disagreement on any of the specific pieces of information that were presented, certainly when one tots it all up, it's a high number, and the overall number seemed to be of significant concern to the committee. So I will leave it at that for now.
Other questions?
Can I just add?
Yes, Dr. Lupino?
Let me just add the one piece. Thank you for the comment about the senior staff. I just want to add the principals to that mix. We made a decision both on the presentation you're going to hear this evening and on the presentation that we made last night and that we'd made last Thursday to you to give the principals something to react to. We met with them on Friday and then again at the beginning of this week, and they were great help in really adding some meat to the bones, if you will, on some really important concepts. Those of you who were there last night saw some differences even from last Thursday. That's our principals. That's what they brought to the table on Friday, and it wouldn't have been nearly as good of a presentation without their input. So, thanks.
them for us.
Ms. Stone?
I just want to add to that, I was incredibly impressed at the number of principals.
Exactly.
And the headmaster who were in the room at the meeting last night.
Yes.
It was extraordinary, and for them to be there and to participate in that way.
Agreed.
Good, so I remain your humble servant. If you have any other thoughts, I'd be delighted to hear them.
Thank you, Ms. Ditkoff. Thank you, Mr. Chan. Are there other additional liaisons that anyone would like to mention? Ms. Charlepsky?
I have two. One, I was at the Advisory Council for Early Childhood Education today for the Department of Early Education and Care. And there were a couple things that came up that I thought would be interesting just for people to know. So it's FYI more than anything else. Apparently, there's some legislation that went through just recently. I'm sure Ms. Kershaw knows about this, about fingerprinting and background checks for, I'm sure you know more than you want to know about this. that for early childhood centers, family daycares, any, I'm sorry?
It's not just for early childhood. This is a pre-K through 12, and actually there are other positions. We actually talked about this after, when it was passed, this law
Did I miss
here. We talked about it here, and what's happening is they're getting ready, the implementation schedule is
Right.
moving, yes.
Okay. All right. Sorry. There's also, in addition, like we have retail and the English language learner, English language instruction initiative coming from the state, so does, they don't have the same Department of Justice type of incentive to work on this, but they are developing early English development standards for the whole state, for teachers in preschool and in other family daycares, et cetera, to help them do a WIDA-type instruction for teachers to teach them how to help children who are learning a second language. So that's part of what's happening there right now, and they're starting to roll that out, and they've actually translated the early English language learners standards into 5 different languages, which I thought was pretty amazing. So we may be able to use some of that even with for parents to be able to understand what's happening. And the third one was this, I don't think we talked about it here, an alignment study that they've done through the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge Grant to see how curriculum from birth to 5 aligns with K through 12. And so that study is just now completed, and with recommendations on how to go forward. And they're going to be moving forward to realign their early learning standards, which are ours too, for our pre-K classrooms. That was it for that one.
Thank you, Ms. Chalupsky.
Welcome. I have one other,
Oh, sorry.
because you guys sent me. So I want you all to see what you missed out on by not going down to MASC. See, and next year, you too can have one. And I will be happy to accompany anyone who wants to go next year. I may not even accompany, but if that would be the only way to get somebody to go. It actually was quite interesting this year. There were a number of interesting breakout sessions, and I saw a lot of our old friends from Brookline who are in different places around the Commonwealth. So that was that, and the voting took place as we suspected. Everything passed. I will do full disclosure, and you cannot send me again next year if you prefer to. However, on the one resolution that we did not vote for, the one having to do with Park, after listening to a couple of breakout sessions, and then there was an amendment to it that required that MASC file or support legislation that requires funding for any regulations originating from DESA that directly affect the allocation of staff time or time on learning of students. Lacking such legislation, MASC should be prepared to file a petition with the State Auditor's Office for a determination of whether said regulations constitute an unfunded mandate. And the mandated testing of Park will have a major and potentially adverse effect on the school budgets of all communities required to take part in it. It will also have an effect on the time on learning of our students. Communities must be given adequate funding and time to budget and plan for such a major initiative. So that actually passed unanimously, the amendment, and then the other part also passed. And I voted because I think that an unfunded mandate is, for me at least, something that we need to be firm on and consistent, that no matter what they are, we need those, we need the funds for initiatives that are coming down and upon us. The only other thing that had a few no votes was the evaluation of the commissioner, that had 4 no votes. That's my report from MASC. Does anybody have any questions?
I just want to follow up on the second item that you talked about from the early childhood meeting, having to do with early childhood and ELL.
Yes.
And just a little bit on that and another piece of ruling, if you will, that we've received from the department. In the definition of teachers who are considered to be core teachers under the retail discussions, if you will, with the Justice Department, early education teachers, classroom teachers, are in that definition. However, in many districts, like ours, we've not considered students in early education to be ELL. We've not created a designation for them. So the difficulty that we thought we were asking about when we and other communities asked the question was, given that you must have an ELL student in your classroom to take the course, because you must go back and do certain things between sessions of the course. How do we do that when we don't have anyone in early education who's designated? This may be a matter of communities asking a question that they really didn't want the answer to, because the answer we've gotten is that in the future, all early education programs will need to designate students as ELL who require services. There will be no more sort of, provide them as you can without the official designation. We will be required to provide the designation. This may lead to some budgetary issues in terms of staffing in ELL. We're anticipating it will. We had a discussion last Friday with the principals about whether we were going to factor it into the presentation last night. We really didn't have a great way to capture that right now, so we didn't. We made a judgment not to for the time being. We thought there was enough there, quite frankly, to talk about. But that's going to be an issue, and it's going to be another year till our teachers can actually begin to get the retail training, because they won't have designated students. So I think there's a link between that second item you talked about and this piece, which is a sort of a statewide ruling.
Right, but so what you're talking about is for public schools
Yes.
mostly, and then this is for any other center or that it's not, I don't think, under the Department of Justice. That part, I don't think they are under the Department
No,
of
I
Justice.
think you're right. I don't believe they are.
But they're going ahead and doing it, which is the right thing to do, but they're doing it at a much, well, hopefully a slower pace than what we're doing. I mean, I certainly recommended
Yeah.
that. But I have some of the slides and stuff if you want to take a
Great,
look
thanks.
at it. I'd be happy to share it.
Thank you.
And FYI, the person in charge is a parent here in Brookline.
Thank you.
Ms. Scotto, you had a liaison.
Yes. Tuesday night was the Brookline Education Foundation Board meeting, and there was a report on a survey conducted at the end of last year's school year among teachers and administrators about the BEF and how the application process, the awarding process, whatever, all kinds of issues related. There was a great deal of very positive feedback that the BEF received, and some good suggestions that they are in the process of evaluating to see if they want to implement them. And for example, one thing had to do with the grant cycles. Did they need a rolling grant cycle? Did they need a fall grant cycle? So they're in the process of evaluating the results of this survey and feeling very good about how positive it was on the part of the staff and looking at what they might do that would make it easier. In addition, this is the second year of what's called the Idea Lab, and the period for submissions to the Idea Lab has just ended, and they've had 90 submissions. The Idea Lab is a new way of applying for the grant, and the grants will specifically be around something that is innovative. that you can do in your classroom. And instead of writing a grant proposal, you have to write or film or in some way notify them that you want to make a submission. And then you're given an appointment, and you have to come in and pitch it to the group for 10 minutes. So it's all oral. At this point, I think that process is in place, and people will hear sometime in December after they've all pitched their ideas who has gotten the funding for it. So the BEF, I think, is full of very enthusiastic people working hard for the benefit of the school system, and the survey has shown that people are quite enthusiastic about what they're doing.
Great, thank you. Ms. Cox?
While Barbara was at the BEF meeting, Mr. Morse and I were at the public hearing, the Board of Selectmen's public hearing on the Hancock Village 40B proposal. Mr. Morse did a terrific job of laying out for the selectmen and the audience there that the school committee has no position on the 40B proposal, and we are committed to providing a quality education to any child who lives in Brookline, but wanting people to be aware of some of the implications that proposed development might have for our operations and our capital planning.
Thank you, Ms. Cox. So the Town Council Search Committee met this morning, and I'm part of that. And the search will formally be launched, I think, beginning tomorrow, with an advertisement and actually a public position paper that anybody can have that wants it. And it's been a great discussion, and Angela Allen was there. Dr. Allen made some extremely important suggestions this morning, which were well received. Okay. It's time for public comment. Do we have anyone signed up, Ms. Coyne? No one signed up. Even though no one has signed up, is there anyone now in the room who would care to make a public comment? Seeing none, we will move on. We were, I think, scheduled to have a student report, but there is no student to make the report. And so we'll move on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Lupini.
Good. I'm not making a student report. So, two of the items have already been covered. One in the opening slide regarding future meetings. I had to postpone the Pierce Forum on November 4th, and that was on the calendar. It's been rescheduled for December 2nd. The second had to do with the School Building Authority meeting, which, as was mentioned, is scheduled for the 20th, and staff is recommending our number of 1,010 students, which is what happens when you use their formula to calculate out 5 sections per grade level K through 8. Next week, we have 3 meetings with Override Study Committee Education Task Force groups. One on Tuesday afternoon prior to town meeting, one on Wednesday afternoon, and one on Friday morning. I said, when I sent you the report, I said that all 3 would be in town hall, but we didn't know exactly where. That's not accurate. The Tuesday afternoon meeting will be held at the high school, and I don't think we have a room yet. Yeah, we're still identifying where. But the other 2 will be held here in town hall. So that's all next week. We have the main item in my report this week deals with 20 of our students who've been recognized through the 3 major College Board recognition programs, one of which you're probably very familiar with. The other 2, I'm not sure that you are, although we have had students recognized in these programs in prior years. We have 14 students including Jonathan, who have been recognized through the National Merit Scholarship Program. They've been recognized as semifinalists. I've given you the blurb from the College Board on that program, and so congratulations to all 14 of our members of the senior class who've been recognized as National Merit Scholars. We have 2 of our students who've been recognized through the National Achievement Scholarship Program, which is a program designed to provide recognition for outstanding Black American high school students. This is not the first year we've had students recognized, and we're very pleased to have 2 of our students recognized as semifinalists in that program. And again this year, as has happened a number of years, I think at least the last 3 or 4 consecutive years, we have students recognized in the National Hispanic Recognition Program, a program to honor students. Again, all these students are honored starting with their PSAT scores. So 4 of our students have been recognized through that program as well. So 20 students from Brookline High School honored in the 3 recognition programs run by the College Board. That's my report.
Thank you, Dr. Lapini. Are there questions for Dr. Lapini? Mr. Pollack?
Can you just circle back on the calculation of the 5-section school population of 1,010 for devotion? You said pre-K through 8, and then you correct yourself to K through 8.
Yes.
How does pre-K figure into it for the component of pre-K that's for special education, that's sort of a required part of our curriculum? Is that?
So there's not a pre-K program located there presently, and I think we're still discussing whether there will end up with a classroom. My advocacy would be that there should be. We did it at Runkle, we did it at Heath. There should be at least one classroom there. They won't be reimbursable spaces. They weren't. It was not at Runkle. They were not considered reimbursable spaces because MSBA does not reimburse on after-school programming spaces you designate as after-school programs, and they don't reimburse on pre-K.
Even though pre-K, is that another unfunded mandate or whatever? I mean, even though pre-K is required to provide education to sort
of. I've argued that point with the MSBA about early education and about after-school programming many, many times, and will continue to, but they don't reimburse. So far. They were helpful, I will say, at Runkle. I hope it's okay for me to say this. They were helpful in the way we designated spaces, in helping us create some spaces that could be used as more designated than not space for after-school programming, and the way we designated those spaces in the building plans. They were helpful in doing that, and I anticipate they'll be helpful in the future where they can be on these issues. That was that.
That was good.
Thank you.
It's really, I'm just thinking to our, again, to our government relations discussion, and I guess it's not relevant because that's an executive, the MSBA. I mean, that's an interesting question to pose to the MSBA, but I guess we can't bring it to the legislators. Is that correct?
I believe it's in their regs.
And are the regs voted by the legislature? No.
By their board.
By the board of,
MSBA?
It'd be by the board of MSBA, but the more interesting question, to your point, is really whether their creation of regulations is constricted in some way by the legislation that created them. It could be that the legislation that created them is K to 12. I don't know that. So that would be worth a look.
I think that's true. I have spoken with the previous commissioner of early education and care about this issue, asking, because they, claim all the time that there's not enough space, for access for kids, and that, I said, well, we're building schools. Why not, incorporate into the regs that you have to build space for pre-K too? Or that you're reimbursed for it. Forget about have to, that you would be reimbursed for it. And I brought that up with her way back when, and actually then subsequently with the new commissioner, I've also talked with him about it.
So may I do one more?
Please.
So let me put my Collaboratives Commission hat on. The third area that we've spoken with them about regularly is the fact that they don't reimburse on on classrooms for collaborative programs, which to me is just incredible. The same, well, not the same agency, but we have a Department of Education which often issues letters to collaboratives talking about how their programs are more restrictive than they should be, given that they're not located in school buildings, and yet we have a school building authority that doesn't reimburse on classrooms in those projects that we build. There are other states in this country that require that collaborative, or in Pennsylvania, intermediate unit classrooms be built into a new project. It's a requirement of building the project if you want reimbursement. But in Massachusetts, we don't actually even reimburse. Could very well be.
I think it's yeah. Okay,
Thanks.
right, thank you. Okay, are there any other questions? If not, we have a school 2014-2015 school calendar with early dismissal dates on a second reading.
I do not have anything to say other than what I said last week. The main issue for our calendar creation really is around what our collective bargaining agreement says in terms of the way our collaborative time is presently structured, and what our collective bargaining agreements say in terms of starting dates. As I said, the last two meetings, we made different proposals in an attempt to more meet the calendars that are the norm in the Metro West. The BEU Executive Committee turned us down and was not willing to take it to membership for a vote. Reps, thank you. Turned it down and was not willing to take it to membership for a vote like they did last spring. So given those constraints, this is the calendar I'm left to recommend.
That being the case, I guess we need a motion for this calendar. Ms. Kershaw, thank you so much. Do we have a second? Thank you, Mr. Chang. Is there any discussion? Yes, Mr. Jarlewski.
We have to get this done now, right? I mean, this isn't something we could.
I think we owe it to families to give them a calendar, to provide them with a calendar for next school year. Yes.
Ms. Ditkoff?
I think it's just, I think maybe the chairman or someone can work with the superintendent to craft a couple sentences about the school committee's feelings on this calendar, because
I'm glad to do that.
going into the last week in June again, I mean, we
Right.
are quite clear what the community thinks of that. And
Right.
So I think it's worth saying.
I agree. So we shall do that. In the meantime, we have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? Yes, Ms. Kershaw?
So I understand that the way the process worked, but I also feel like this contract is our contract. It's our contract, it's the teacher's contract, and we're honoring the terms of it, and this is where we landed. So I feel like this is a question for the negotiations committee, and if this is the second year running that we're unhappy with the way the calendar has worked out, and as a parent, as well as a school committee member, I think we should request that the negotiations committee ensure that this be something that's discussed robustly in the next opportunity for the contract.
In fact, you did? Yep. Okay.
Have the discussion, suggest we have a discussion.
Okay, thanks. So now, seeing no other questions, let's call for a vote. All those in favor of the calendar, albeit reluctantly or not reluctantly, as the case may be, please raise your hand. It seems to me that that's unanimous, so I don't have to call for noes or abstentions. Thank you very much. At this point, Dr. Lupini, we have the overview of long-term technology plan.
Right, and I'm just looking for who's starting.
And
Are you
we,
beginning this, Dr. Fisher-Mueller?
Excuse me?
You're beginning this.
I'm on it.
Excellent. Okay. So in much this, in a very similar spirit, I should say, to the presentation last week, to lay out our long-term needs in the budget, in budgets and staffing where shortfalls have hit us, we have spent a considerable amount of time, senior staff, Mr. Moore, Mr. Stokes, principals, others, many others, looking at the long-term technology plan, where we all believe in working with our staff and a number of outside experts, this district should be moving in some very key areas of providing our staff and students with the tools they need for teaching and learning. And so I'm really pleased tonight to be able to introduce again, this overview of where we are with this plan that we will be scheduling to take to the override study group for discussions with them in the coming weeks. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Fisher-Mueller.
Thank you very much. So there are 4 documents going around that we'll be speaking to. Tonight I'm joined by Scott Moore and Peter Rowe, as Dr. Lupini described, to share the framework of our technology budget plan with you and those funding projections. And before I start and launch into the presentation, if I can bring us back to your comment, Mr. Chang, just a few minutes ago about last night and the idea of putting forth our description of the needs as a result of the past few years of enrollment growth and the challenges to our budget. And let you know that, in fact, that's what we're doing tonight as well, is we're putting a stake in the ground, and we're letting folks know that in order to be where we believe we ought to be for Brookline students in the year 2013, this is the work we need to do, and these are the expenses relating to that work. And we have been in a mode of catching up slowly. We have been. And if I may quote Ms. Ditkoff a while back, there is a request for a leapfrog in our technology work. And I must say, I am very excited to be here tonight to present this to you because of the energy in Brookline right now around technology and the position that our teachers are in of having been given support and some resources. They are dying for more. Dying for more. We have a technology vision that was initially established by our program review committee and has been tweaked a little since then. We see technology as a strategy, a tool to help us do even better than we are in the areas of communication and collaboration, to maximize learning, to support students in obtaining digital literacy skills, and you will also hear the phrase digital citizenship skills. Also, to create learner-centered environments focused on inquiry, to engage adults in professional learning. And number 6 really relates to the business of schools, to become more efficient and more effective in our business practices. While there are 6 statements up here, I would like to weight them. And I believe numbers 2 and 4 are really at the heart of our work. That in a classroom with educators, with curriculum that is relevant, authentic, instruction is student-centered, inquiry is welcomed, that you can transform student learning. Students can have the opportunity to maximize their learning. Those are very, very strong words. They're very strong words. But I think some of you may have had the experience of watching a child participate in some learning, some activity that moved them, that had them want to learn even more or something different, that piqued their interest, or they wondered even more. There are students who, with the support of technology and great educators, are now students, they are learners that they have not been in the past. So I appreciate the push on the use of those strong words, and I would ask you to entertain them as we share this with you. Our overall goal is by 2019 to create the infrastructure, build instructional capacity, and support innovation for the full integration of technology into teaching, learning, and the administration in the public schools of Brookline. The budget plan that we are sharing with you, the framework of that plan that we're sharing with you tonight, is all about reaching this goal here. And then in light of our vision. Similar to last night, Dr. Lupini described guiding assumptions. We also have guiding assumptions. They could also be called guiding understandings or guiding beliefs. Shared understandings and shared beliefs. And I say shared because, again, referencing Dr. Lupini's comments, we've worked with principals to design these guiding assumptions. We've had conversations with coordinators and teachers that these describe, again, not only assumptions that we are making in the development of this framework, but actually the understandings that we've all come to with our learning and the beliefs that ground our work with technology. We absolutely have to have a solid infrastructure. That infrastructure, that backbone, has to be robust. It has to be reliable. We have taken big steps in the past few years. Again, in collaboration with Kevin Stokes, CIO of Town and Schools, we have increased our bandwidth and the strength of our network. And we need to be positioned to do that even more as more users get on the network. Devices do not transform learning. Bold, underline, highlight. Devices do not transform learning. Student learning is about instruction, curriculum, assessment, resource management, and meaningful relationships. Technology cannot replace that or those. Technology can enhance, technology can enrich. Technology cannot replace. Not the kind of learning, not the kind of teaching that we're looking for and working toward here in Brookline. It's critically important that there is universal access, sometimes described as 24/7. Personally, as a parent, I wish it wasn't sometimes. But the idea that learning can occur anywhere, almost, anywhere, anytime, connects back to that statement of our vision around maximizing learning. When the ability to learn is that available and that welcome, then you can have significant learning gains. All is bolded here. Technology can mean different things to different students at different times. Different students need particular devices and are served well with particular devices. Assistive technology can be transformational for some students, and it can be very, very meaningful for students across the continuum, learning continuum. And so what we have to do is design a technology plan that meets the needs of every single student in Brookline. That's a tall order. Ongoing professional development is essential. This professional development oftentimes is translated into how to use the device, how to search on the internet. Professional development that is essential includes that, yes, you have to learn how to drive the car, but it's also about, and I have no idea where this analogy is going, it's also about professional development on instruction, professional development relating to
content expertise, professional development around curriculum and the development of curriculum. Professional development is essential. The mobile technology relates then again to this notion of universal access 24/7. It has to be convenient. When I talk with Headmaster Holman and we talk about the advantages of the technology present in Newton North, she talks about the ease of the use of technology and the value of mobile devices that you can just plug in. And it's that mobile technology that strengthens those opportunities. Safety and security paramount. Absolutely. Students have to learn how to use the internet safely. They have to learn as young users, and they have to learn as they grow. So that instruction for those students across those grade levels needs to be developmentally appropriate. Learning how to use technology in kindergarten is different than in middle school, high school, obviously. Inasmuch as technology changes very, very quickly, it needs to be maintained. We need to have a plan that sustains our capacity. We need to have a plan that can actually not only provide life cycle, but can provide flexibility that we can make some adjustments with new technology and not just be jumping and running after every single new device that comes up. Relating also to this idea of how quickly technology is changing and that fast pace of learning, this plan needs to be flexible. And these assumptions need to be revisited over and over and over again as we learn more. Again, going back to my comment that these are not just shared assumptions, they are shared understandings. They are shared beliefs. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott Moore in just one second. But if I may, as Scott launches into the framework of the budget, and Mr. Rowe will then follow with some numbers, this is my opportunity to let you know or remind you of that feeling when you look at your mortgage statement and you see the interest that you pay over 15, 20, 30 years, right? Or your car loan, or whatever that may be, that cumulatively we are seeking a very significant investment in technology to advance the learning of Brookline students.
To welcome, or to meet that goal by FY19, we've structured the budget around some key structural elements. And those key structural elements, you have a couple documents. There's this one. This is my preference. Other people on our team have a preference of the longer one in bullets. They're both versionings of the same thing for different styles. So there are 5 key structural elements, and those key 5 structural elements are broken down into some further subdivisions that we've identified that will have budgetary impact. This document, or the other one, is not by any means a detailed project roadmap that will be necessary to properly address any of these subdivisions, but rather is the broad scaffolds that are in place that help us move from where we are to where we're trying to get to. The first key structural element is the idea of a strong and sustainable infrastructure and supports for maintaining efforts around technology moving forward. We see that including a robust wireless and wired network, providing investments to provide ongoing support for the advancement of those networks over time. It includes assessing and monitoring bandwidth needs to meet. We know that bandwidth today is going, we're going to look back, just like we looked back a couple years ago, we look at what we had in bandwidth a couple years ago to what we have now. We're going to couple more years, we're going to look back at what we have now and be like, wow, that's such a small amount, right? We know that it's exponentially growing, and we need to be able to be prepared both in our network infrastructure to support those changes, as well as having the tools in place to monitor and to grow our bandwidth to meet the needs for a dynamic learning environment. And to stay pace with a lot of the professional recommendations in this area. Device life cycle. You've heard me talk about it before when I've stood up here in front of you. When you make investments in technology, especially in those devices have a known relative endpoint of their efficiencies, and they need to be replaced otherwise in a timely manner, otherwise you lose momentum going forward. So we are looking to, on almost every element of the budget, we have been trying to look at what we believe the life cycle of that equipment is and plan accordingly. Those life cycles range depending on the type of devices and or technologies. Anywhere from 3 to about 7 years is where we are targeting. And we know that we need ongoing technical support and increased services to recognize that we're trying to grow a system that's going to take us to new places, and we need to make sure that we are prepared to support that new work moving forward. The second instruction, or the second key element, is our direct actions to provision our classrooms and improve mobility. We have a classroom standard now that we want to expand on. Specifically, the area where we need to grow is in access to mobile computing, basically carts of laptops. We have had desktop, for the most part, our movement or our supports up to this point have been mostly desktop computers in classrooms, maybe in labs at 6 of the 8 schools. And we invested several years ago, or a couple years ago, we've now just completed this year, the full transition to a more robust wireless infrastructure. That increased reliability of the wireless is creating new needs, because now people are recognizing, wow, we can trust that a computer or a cart of computers can actually work without having to be tethered to the room, or that the only reliable place before was in a computer lab. And so immediately, as people are seeing that, they are asking for more access, and we're unable to provide it at this point. In addition to this move towards more access, one of the challenges of this of planning for 5 years out with technology is recognizing that things are changing faster than we can actually act. So I do believe that we are going to make initial moves in providing more access directly in our schools, trying to grow something as a target around a cart of instructional devices per grade in each school. But before we probably achieve all of that, some of the realities around what is a bring your own infrastructure, I think, are going to meet us both ways. So we are going to then start recognizing that we need to start building the supports now for a bring your own device supports. So the initial move is increase our inventory to address immediate needs, and then welcome bring your own device infrastructure to match, and then those things will level out a bit. In addition to provisioning the classrooms, we are looking at basically modernizing our instructional spaces with mounted projection. Right now, we've been trying to get projection in every classroom. We're not there yet. We're doing it on mobile carts and with portable projectors. In those places where we have mounted projection, the Runkle School, the Devotion School through PTO supports, and some of the other specialty classrooms, everybody who has mounted projection speaks to what Ms. Fisher-Mueller Dr. Fisher-Mueller was saying around just the ease. It's so much easier. I'm not tripping over cables. I'm not wiring something up every time. I go in, I turn it on, it works, much like the system that we have have right now, here in this room. So looking to add that kind of systems and ease into our classrooms. The third key structural element is investment in administrative tools and helping us with moving data around. What we're targeting is interoperable data. We do not have, at this exact moment, the data infrastructure and supports necessary to move us where we want to go with both administrative efficiencies as well as teaching and learning data systems that we believe will then give us back institutional knowledge as we help develop them, and put this data right in the hands of teachers who then can also act on much of that data. So we have specific goals around developing, basically assessing our current data systems, finding what they are and are not doing, and then begin addressing transitions to meet those, as well as our administrative tools to do that. The fourth structural element is around teaching and learning resources and tools. That includes software support, whether in student software support, either cloud-based or local software. Also, a significant investment in student online resources. We have a small portfolio now of online resources. Some of those are provided through the state Massachusetts library system, but we want to, and there's requests for more access to reliable online resources for students to address the variety of needs. I also include in that audiobooks and ebooks as part of our library, basically enhancing our library system to be able to address those needs. For the last several years, there's been a real push for audiobooks, and we just don't have, the budget doesn't extend the way it needs to in order to cover that. Also included in the teaching and learning resources is curriculum and assessment tools for both sharing of curriculum as well as, like I said, having tools for teachers, both for, and we have this vision of being able to, from the delivery of assessments to the gathering of data, to the analysis of that data, to giving that data back, shortening that time frame for everybody with these robust data systems. So the data systems and the curriculum and assessment systems will kind of work together to help deliver that. In addition to that, there are specific learning management systems. We have implemented the last couple of years a learning management system at the high school. We would like to be able to extend that down to the middle grades and also assess a lot of learning management like tools for even younger grades than that over time. And we recognize that in order to do this, we need to fundamentally take a look at some of the key staffing that we have in place and what needs we need in order to continue to grow and support in the areas that we're identifying. And in the last key structural element is what we're calling advances in innovation. And primarily that is to address both the professional development side, both the tools and the opportunities to support adult learning necessary to make these transitions to a digital world, and also the opportunities to be able to adjust with what we're calling innovation approaches. The last several years, even more so than before, people have talked that they really felt that our efforts are, almost to the comment around the leapfrogging, right? That our efforts really are struggling to maintain even what is, and what isn't enough, let alone trying to investigate new and innovative practices around teaching and learning and other efficiencies. So, like I said, the document that you have in front of you is basically details details out or scaffolds out really what some of the initial moves would be between FY15 and FY19 to get us to meet that goal of that robust technology infrastructure and ongoing supports necessary to move us forward as a district. The do you want me to tee up? Oh, yes. Helen.
What is a learning management system?
So a learning management system is a suite of tools that facilitate 24/7 connections between teachers and students. So the easiest way, the best way for me to describe it is right now, or going back, right, teachers in schools have had wonderful ways of having workflows. Most of those workflows are paper-based, right? We make our handouts, we photocopy them, we pass them out. Students, even if they're working on a computer, would typically type something out and print it out and then hand it in, and then teachers would mark that up and then they would pass it back, and it was all in this analog way, even if you were using digital tools at different points. A learning management system basically helps helps migrate all of those processes over into digital ways. So with Canvas, students can submit work directly to the teacher through Canvas. The teacher can open that up.
Canvas is a software?
Canvas is a piece of software, which is our learning management system. A teacher can then open up that document online with an iPad or on their computer and actually can mark that up online and then send it back to the student. So, and actually when the teacher actually grades it, the student can actually get a text that says, your teacher just posted a grade on such and such, and then can open up their smartphone and take a look at what their grade was in the learning management system that was just given. So it helps, or it's a necessary component to moving towards one of the key pieces of this, which is you need to start moving towards digital workflows. It doesn't mean that analog workflows don't still exist, right? And it's kind of funny when I was thinking of the analogy around music. And for the longest time, I've been in the CD realm for years, and I've now ripped my whole collection, and I have all of this stuff at my house, wirelessly streaming it by Zone, and I can listen to all these different things. But then you go into Newberry Comics, and what's the big thing? The big thing is people who want that analog sound. So vinyl is coming back, right? So, so where vinyl is, So where vinyl comes back though is because now it has an aesthetic thing that people miss. But the other conveniences and the efficiencies that were still garnered around the digital piece are still desired. Right? I like the instant access I have. I listen to an album now, and I love certain sonic qualities of that album, but all of a sudden, 25 minutes, and I have to flip sides. I'm like, wow, I can't remember how short that was, right? It's 3 or 4 songs on an album side. Right? Yeah. In addition to a learning management system, we also have parent portals and student portals that provide access to I want to distinguish the difference because the learning management system is around what I would call the classroom interactions, and the parent portal and student portal are around more of the more student information sharing aspects. It's your transcripts, it's your grade history, it's your where are you on track for meeting your graduation requirements and those things. So they have similar functions, but the learning management system is actually the toolkit around the teaching and learning piece, specifically.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes.
Mr. Chang. Oh.
Well, thank you, first of all, Dr. Fisher-Mueller, for giving us kind of the vision of really taking us, again, for the next 10 plus years. I think this is a fantastic start and really give us, a good framework to build on. And Scott, thank you very much for laying this out and giving us some rich initial details around what's necessary. I guess I have a few questions just in terms of the layout. I see there's a need for some spend, around $2.5 million through 19. What kind of expenditure do you think you'd require to out years in terms of maintaining and continually being, ahead of the curve, if you will, in technology in terms of spend moving forward?
Yeah. I think you want to put it. So I'll let Mr. Rowe speak to this, and then I'll just stand here and we'll.
Okay. Before you do that, Mr. Rowe, my question is, do you want us to ask questions now, or would you prefer to complete the presentation? How do you want to handle that?
I think if we use Mr. Chang's question actually as a segue to Mr. Rowe's piece, then we're finished up after this and we can ask questions.
Okay.
Yeah, let me go through this quickly and just kind of frame what we're talking about, so that the plan that's been put together here, we're really trying to talk about as a sustainable technology ecosystem. And so if you stop and look at the end game, it's really looking at what's in this quadrant here. And in fact, what we're talking about is something in the neighborhood of $8 million worth of hardware. Now, just pause for a moment to absorb that, and think about it in terms of all the desktop technology, all of the wireless access points, all of the equipment that's in the closets, the wiring, the projection systems in the classrooms, in other words, that will be in the classroom. Now, there's all of that infrastructure, some of which we already own and some of which we've built up over time. Our goal was to try to say, how do we now look forward and think about what we've done over the years, partly from our general fund, partly from capital projects such as Runkle, where it's allowed us to move forward with fully, robustly equipped classrooms, from a capital project, understanding that we're 2 years into that building. And if you believe in the 5-year life cycle of a projection system, 5 years from now, we have to think about where's the money going to come from to renew what's there. And so what we tried to do here was say, okay, at the end of the line, if everybody was fully equipped with where we think they should be, that's an $8 million investment in hardware. And so, and we have some other schools where we have smart boards or other equipment for students where we've actually had contributions from PTOs. So when you think about how the system has managed to fund technology over the years, we've patched it together from multiple sources. Okay. Now, as we go forward, we may be challenged to do the same thing, but we wanted to make sure we had a sense of, well, what's the cost of doing that? So that the cost to get to what Scott and Jennifer has suggested is an infrastructure that would cost about $8 million. In addition, they've looked at some staffing support that's in the $750,000 range. I've actually looked at it and adjusted it down to about $445,000. But that's my style. And applications, and this is where when Scott talks about learning management systems and data management systems, there's a I'd say really fully robust package of applications that would be used by staff either for, mainly through subscription services, where we do the parent portal, the learning management system, the data analysis system, the video distribution, all those kinds of things. So that if you fully invest in those have an annual cost that's significant. And then what we've said is, because these have a life cycle and they need to be replaced, and a laptop computer may need to be replaced every 4 years, but a projection system, its life cycle may be 6 or 7 years, and the switches and the access points, the wireless access points, may have a 7-year life cycle. We've looked at an average that said if you really invested over time in this, it really is about $1.6 million annually in terms of a permanent cost to first equip and then continuously replenish on a sustainable basis. And so we've laid out a model here that says that with approximately $1.3 million to $1.4 million in hardware continuous investment, and building then to staff and application annual costs in the $1.2 million range. We build to a $2.5, $2.6 million annual cost of sustaining a model that looks like this, and that's the number that Mr. Chang was speaking of. So what we looked at doing was saying, how could we get there? And laid out a model that said one way is to try to get a jump start in year one that's in the $1 million range, and then build that with an increase that's 600 and 400 and 300 and down to 100. So that what we'll need to do if we really were to build to a sustainable plan like this over a 5-year period is look at some infusion in year one and then build on that as we go forward, and understanding the impact and the significance of the investment. So as I say, we have, over the years we've been investing in technology, we've used multiple sources to do this. And with the opportunity to take advantage of the capital infusion that we get when every time we upgrade a building, we've recently found that we can take advantage of that. But what we're doing is we're reaching these plateaus where the technology infrastructure in buildings is significant and is a big piece. When we were only buying laptop computers, it was a freestanding investment. When you buy laptop computers that are integrated into a network that has significant infrastructure in the background that supports applications and integration of data and communication, it really is moving you to another plateau. So that's why we wanted to make sure we first said, what's the cost of this if it were fully rolled out, and then we need to think about a plan that could get us there. So what this is one scenario that says, this could get us to that point. Now what we have to do is put this plan together in the basket of needs we have and say, is there a way we can structure something that resembles this or something that resembles a modification of this so that we can move ourselves in that direction? So to answer your question. Yeah.
Sorry, let me just make sure I understand this chart. So the first column overall, the 9.7 total, which includes hardware, staff, application, is really kind of the initial down payment jumpstart that we would require.
Well, because you can finance this, you actually don't need to have that initial down payment. If you had $9 million, you could in year one go out, buy everything and install it.
Yep.
And then you wouldn't have to spend anything on hardware for 4 to 5 years, in which case you'd replace the 4-year-old and the 5-year-old, and then the 7-year-old, and then what you'd essentially do is every 8 years you'd spend, every 5 to 7 years you'd spend $8 million. At the end of 7 years you'd spend $8 million. Then you'd do it all again.
Yep.
An alternative way is to buy pieces of equipment and finance them over a couple of years.
Yep.
And then you sequence things so that you're continuously replacing and moving out the older, bringing in new. So what that does is it also allows your support staff to have 4-year-old and 5-year-old and 3-year-old and 2-year-old, so that you don't have these large, suddenly we have to replace all the laptops and 2,000 units come in, right? It's, you do 300 and 300 and 300 and 300 and 300, so that it's trying to phase us into that cycle where we're continuously replacing some and maintaining everything, so that there's a life cycle mode to this as we go forward. And in order to do this, you have to have a sustainable budget, and that's really what this is saying, is that a model such as this, with a approximately $2.5 million investment that we had annually, would support this. And some of this is annual because it's, of course, for staff. Mm-hmm. And some of it's because we're purchasing simply licenses for certain packages. Our student information system today that we use is $7? $10 a head. So we pay $10 per student.
Right.
For the licensing of the software, basically.
Okay.
And many of these applications actually are in that model, and the advantage of that is, as new applications come out, as the market changes, you can take advantage of
These are all SaaS-based softwares, right? So you get constant updates.
Yes.
Okay. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Scott, do you want to finish, or do you want to?
Either way, if it's a budget question, I think Peter will jump. Yeah, no, I'm finished with, there's
You're
nothing-
finished.
Yes, there's nothing specifically that, so more questions. If it's a budget question, I think Mr. Rowe will take it, and if
Okay.
it's something else, then I'll take it.
Okay, thanks. Ms. Jalewski?
So this is a budget question. I'm not clear on what's included in these numbers.
Oh,
It's
well,
my
sure.
understanding that Runkle is basically fitted out the way we would want the other
Yes,
schools to be.
But, yes, it is. And so if you think of the Runkle model, what this does is it essentially funds that for every classroom. So
I
that
get that.
Okay.
So we're talking only about 9 schools, 8
Talking about-
schools there.
all the other schools, right? And then.
Right,
Right.
beyond Runkle.
And then X years from now, right, to keep Runkle up to date,
Yeah.
that equipment will need to be replaced.
Right.
And so we need to have, we
No,
need
that
to
I
have the
understand
budget
in
to do that. Yeah,
2019,
right, well,
18, whatever,
okay,
we need
yeah.
to do that. Okay, so this budget already takes into account that piece, that Runkle is not in the initial.
Right, you notice how that the spending in the early years is less than the spending that we plateau to in
Yes.
in
Oh,
the
that
fifth
includes
year.
Runkle.
And so what that does is it takes advantage of the fact that we have equipment in place today, some of which is new this year.
Right.
And so that doesn't need to be replaced until a number of years out, in the same way that Runkle School doesn't need to be replaced and upgraded for a number of years.
Both Mr. Moore and Mr. Rowe, in fact, this makes some assumptions about some future building projects
that's
as
what-
well.
that was my next
And where those will be funded from, correct?
Correct.
You want
and
to
that's-
comment on that?
Exactly. Well, if we think about, for instance, Devotion School, which will be the next school, we would expect that in the same way that Runkle's investment, I think, budget was $600,000 worth of hardware?
Yes.
That we'd have a similar, probably larger, because it's a larger building, piece, and that would account for some of this hardware cost. And as I say, we have to think of it in terms of multiple budgeting areas. We've utilized various strategies over the years to leverage how we get technology into the buildings. I
Right.
don't know that we want to do that, but we probably don't have the ability to put all this in our general fund. So we have to say, okay, how are we going to do this in a strategic way that we can move every school to where we want it to be?
And if I might, Ms. Charlevsky, just to flesh out your question with one more issue, this also already includes the money that we presently spend on technology, right?
Correct.
So
This
that
is-
2.5, that build up to 2.5, right? And then a constant 2.5 from that point forward assumes our present technology budget, that's not in that 2.5, that's in
Correct.
addition to.
So is there anything else today that we're already spending money on that's included in this plan? Or it's all separate, like what you're saying, like the applications, like the learning management system?
For
that you
instance,
said?
we already license and pay for the student management system.
Right.
We've begun to work with an evaluation software program. We currently lease the Canvas program at not at a full rollout. So there are certain systems that we have in place today. And we've taken advantage of the CIP, working with Kevin. We've been able to fund the wireless access points that have upgraded every building over the last, is it 4 years, 3 years? Whatever the number. 2 to 3 to 4 years.
It's only 2 to 3, I think.
So we brought all the schools to a level where we have basically a wireless access point in every classroom or in every hallway. So one of the questions as you go forward is, as you get more users, do you need that second access point in the classroom? Those kinds. So this is intended to be structured in a way that we expand it as we move forward. And then there's the question of how do you, what's the as we see the teaching model in the classroom change, or the integration of this into the teaching, and as Jennifer said, as you make the opportunity there, we believe people will step up and take advantage of that. Then the robustness of it has to grow as well. So that's what we're intending to capture in this.
Ms. Kershaw?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm so thrilled we're having this conversation, so, and I'm looking forward to figuring out how we can support you. So I have one budget thing and then a couple programmatic things. I think this is a little bit hard to understand the way it's presented, but I think I'm starting to grasp it, and I'm worried it doesn't tie out to the detail on the top of here, which has a 0 in FY19.
Sure, well, that's the way I round. So can I, so let me show you the numbers.
No, but
Here's the way it, this is your 0, see that 79,000?
Wait, is that how we have a surplus in the first
That's your
quarter,
zero.
Mr. Rowe?
That's your 0. Here's your, I think it's 300,000 the year before, right? 300?
Yeah.
Right? Here's your 400,000.
Oh, 79
right?
is your.
Here's your 600,000,
Yeah.
and this is your 1,000,002,
But the
right?
0 is the increase from year to year.
Yes, that's what those numbers are.
The increase
Those
is
are,
not the actual money spent.
those are the increases year to year.
You're right.
And this is the 2.5. So when you look at that summary
Right.
report,
Yeah.
that's the Teaching and Learning Office's round number. And when you look at my overview, this is my analysis from a lot of details.
Well, but I think you don't. I think for tomorrow night and in our or whatever in our presentation.
night,
Sorry, whatever it is. When we present on our vision for the budget, and I think we want to make sure we're putting a picture together that shows what's one time, early on investments, what's our ongoing commitment, and what is it building on in terms of the existing budget? Because I think as we present it as a whole package, we can see that these are the increases that are going to require the leapfrog. But I think, I wonder if it would be better for us to sort of present it from sort of one-time new investments, ongoing enhancement, and.
We can do it in multiple ways.
Okay.
No, I appreciate that. And
Yeah.
because this is from a conceptual standpoint. You have to pause for a minute to get your mind around this, because
Right.
you're right, this whole issue of, well, why, if it's $8 million, why isn't it $8 million out here anywhere? The answer is because we have the opportunity to lease purchase or finance the purchase of equipment, and because we stage and we work from a position where we already have equipment in place as we build up to the fully sustainable. So, yes, I understand what you're saying.
Okay. So a couple other suggestions on which show my excitement for this. I want this to be as clear as possible, but also it feels like there's two other areas that are going to, that this 5-year vision is going to, sort of two other big areas of benefit that are going to accrue to the district and the students and the families that feels like we want to articulate. One, I think Dr. Fisher-Mueller got at this, but I think even more so, like the amount of efficiency we're going to gain by having such greater technology in our buildings, and for the teachers to have access to it, and for the students. I mean, I know it would be incredibly difficult for us to quantify, but just the reduction in the amount of transactions they're going to have around each piece of paper. And so I wonder if there's a way we could think about articulating what efficiencies could be gained from our sort of current teaching and learning processes that the technology would support. And related to that, I believe, even though there's a lot of hardware we're going to purchase, that there'd also be an environmental benefit to this. I mean, you see a lot of papers coming home, and then, yeah, I mean, so I feel like we're going to have, this is, I hope, is another investment of sort of targeted investments that are going to yield both efficiencies and savings for financially, but also time for teachers, which is the same. And also, I think you'll have a lot of people who feel like if our investments in technology are going to lead to sort of less paper and more green approach in the schools, that's another guiding assumption or something that we'll gain from it that I think is important to articulate. So my question, though, was, and you got at this a little bit, was sort of about the homeschool connection. And as we have increased, and I think we need to have them, increased expectations for our kids to be able to do their work online and on computers, and what are we thinking about in terms of making sure families have access and also kids can reinforce what they're learning in school in their home environments?
A couple of things. One of the working assumptions was that about technology for all, and we are highly aware of the challenges that not for all exists. And what is exciting is already we're having fantastic conversations across, even outside of the schools, with other department programs and stuff like that. And I believe that we will, well, I know we'll put that issue to bed, I think. We have plans to make sure that no child that no child will not be without an appropriate device. We'll be with one. That we know, but it's not just the device, because if you have a device, but you get home and you don't have access to a reliable network, dial-up that doesn't work, right? If someone posts a video and you have to wait 4 hours for it to load over a dial-up, whatever, right? That's not going to work for learning. So it's what I've said in my conversations is there's lots of layers, and I'm very confident that if we pull back all of the layers and look at what the issues are, we can strategically target each one of those issues and make sure that those are not issues as we move forward. And that's really exciting, and the conversations I've been having with people, they're like, yes, that's exactly what we need to do.
Okay, well, I'm going to go down to Ms. Scotto.
Sure. I think this is a really exciting, vision. I like what I'm hearing. But I do wonder about the reality of being able to deliver this, and I will tell you why. When I think about these devices that we're talking about, first of all, one of our goals is to add, your initial target is one shared cart of appropriate device for each grade level in a school.
Yes.
I retired in 2006. That was what we had then. We're not expanding that at all. And if you have 3 or 4 classes per grade, that cuts way back on the time that you have those devices available. Now, I see over here that you're talking about bring your own device transition. And I'm wondering how that works, because as a classroom teacher, and my kids are going to bring their own device, Abby brings a PC, David brings a Mac, somebody else brings something else. They haven't charged them at home necessarily. They don't have their cords with them to charge them. I'm trying as a teacher to teach a lesson, and I look at this and I think, I can't see how you are going to do this. I mean, I understand there's still these carts there, so if a kid doesn't bring their device on any given day, there should be something. But if the teacher down the hall is using the computer, I don't know how you do it. I also see things like this. The person who has the Mac has Pages on theirs. Somebody else has .doc, the Word document. I use OpenOffice. I mean...
Ms. Scotto.
May I?
Ms. Scotto, I think
Because-
Dr. Lapini would like to respond to you.
So there's a number of assumptions in your question that just aren't true in bring your own device districts.
Okay.
So living in one of those districts, I can tell you that there's a whether it's my device or one I've in the case there been given by the school or purchased from the school, there's a core set of software that's on that device, right? Bring it myself, buy it from the school, et cetera. They don't experience the issues you're talking about, and there are many the great news, I guess the great news here is that there are so many districts that whether it's at the high school level or middle level or some at the elementary level are already down the road with one-to-one or bring your own device, that we have a ton of people that we can learn from. But those kinds of issues of what I'm working on in terms of software and whether I have a PC or a Mac are just not the issue. It does require, in most of the models I've seen, Mr. Moore, correct me if I'm wrong, it does require the right kind of tech staffing, right? Because not only do you have the sort of the help desk function that we have working now that needs to be enriched, quite frankly, in some way, but those schools have a tech support staff for student one-to-one devices, whatever they may be. and they're busy. They're busy in terms of supporting students with what they need, the tools that they need to do what they're doing in the classroom.
Okay, everybody has a question. I want everybody to bear with me, okay? Because we've got lots of people raising their hands. And so I'm going to try to pick the people who haven't spoken yet and then come back to hands that I see. Let's see, Ms. Ditkoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We meant a fairly high-level question, so if people want to stay in the details of the budget, I'm willing to wait if people are on a roll. I have a really different type of question.
Very good. Okay. Ms. Cox.
Just to the point that Dr. Lupini made, when I see staff on that budget, I was assuming that had to do with professional development, but does that have more to do with providing technical support within the school buildings?
Talk about the examples of what's in here in terms of staffing.
So the staffing includes a couple things. One, in order to move forward with say, the mounted projection project, right, we would probably need a project manager who would oversee something as comprehensive as a project that size, as well as some of the initial rollouts of other projects. So it includes things like that. It does include taking a looking at our building staffing on site, library staffing, ETS, educational technology specialist staffing in buildings, and taking a close look at that and determining whether or not we have what we need to actually be successful for an enhancement like we're proposing. It's also, and as well as, I was going to say, the technical support side as well. We're talking about a significant increase in inventory, so making sure it's either the tools to support it with less people, right? So it's an investment that way, or it's a combination, it's most likely a combination of a little bit of both, staffing and the appropriate tools to be able to do things more efficiently.
Mr. Rowe, we had staffing in the presentation, we had technology staffing in the presentation last night. How does what we put there interact with the numbers that are here?
This is what was reflected in the staff we had in
Okay.
the instructional technology piece last year.
Okay, great,
So, yeah,
thanks.
And Scott's right, it really was both a mix of professional and help desk, if you will, technical.
But to his question, professional development of teachers.
Professional development of teachers is not allocated under staffing. There are, in here, it's professional development from tools, and some of the other opportunities for professional development would fall under the existing teaching and learning budget or proposed increases there. So, but we recognize, like one of our assumptions said, professional development is critical to the transition that we're making.
Additionally, in the presentation we did yesterday, the other piece we actually carried under the ed technology was a line for professional development because of the clear need for that to help staff get there. So, yes, we did put that in.
Ms. Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I realized as I was scribbling down all of my questions that I can't possibly ask them all, and I suspect that it wouldn't be fair to ask most of them at this point. So I want to echo what everybody else has said, which is that I'm very pleased to be here having this conversation. It's been a long time coming, and I really appreciate the vision that, and my questions were all getting down to trying to put the leaves on the tree that has been, we have the branches here, and I want to know about the leaves and what color will the leaves be? So at what point will the plan in its development address things like, and I'm just going to read down my list here, different technology for science labs or art or music, which have different kinds of things happening with technology and what they can bring to education. How are we thinking about using the cloud? How do we think about servers versus cloud and how do we think about that? And where is that in the budget and all of those other things? Where in the budget is our support for the bandwidth at home? So it's great to have the vision of supporting access in people's homes, but that's very hard to operationalize. And so where in the budget do we account for what we're going to need to do to make sure that that equity happens? How are we thinking about how this will affect our use of textbooks? You know, as we do all of this integration, right, where do textbooks come in, and when does the plan address that? Where in the plan or when in the plan do we think about the impact on professional development for differentiation specifically? Because differentiation for how students will use the technology as it evolves is different than differentiating instruction for, you know, a math learner who's at one phase or at a different phase. This is going to be a whole new requirement of our teachers to differentiate instruction around the use of technology that they're using in the classrooms, and where does that fall in our plan? And finally, what does success look like? I love the goal, I love the vision, but I noticed that in the detail in fiscal 19, we're doing a lot of ongoing. And so what I want is, what is the vision, what does it actually look like in our classrooms and in our schools when we have fully integrated the way that you've set up? And I sort of, like I said, I want the leaves on the trees, and I understand that, so that's my whole list, and I sort of wonder mostly how the plan is going to move, how we have the time and the staffing and maybe, you know, the help with looking at outside districts and other places that have done that, so that the plan can address all of these things and really get filled out. So how are we going to do that?
Can I just, so these types of questions, the leaves on the tree questions, it would be helpful for you to put in writing and send to us, I think. I think there are things that we can look at. Well, there are a number of those I don't think we know the answers to, and maybe Scott. Right. There are a number of them. Some of them I think we probably do.
Yeah. Well, and I think, then, you know, really to get at those leaves needs more shareholder input, right? For both co-ownership of plans and of what's necessary in order to make something happen. It can't be, you know, me standing here announcing something and then it's going to transform everything in a district, right, like ours. So it's, you know, what this is doing is setting up what I believe, like all the things that you mentioned, I believe that, you know, a couple things I'm like, yeah, you're right, really good point. I don't think I have necessarily a budget item specifically for at-home bandwidth needs, right? I didn't do that, right? But, you know, in this exercise, I tried to, you know, teleport 5 years and then plan backwards from there to be like, what are the things that we should be trying to account for, and how do we account for them for sustainability? And that part of this plan, I think, is really exciting, right? Like that this move is basically a ongoing life support move as well. So as best we can, I believe that there is room in this budget to support, you know, the science classrooms, and what exactly does that science classroom need? And that is shareholder input with, you know, Janet McNeil and Ed Weiser to be like, what does that look like? I'm assuming it looks like an investment in probeware, in more modern classroom spaces for the labs. It's, again, they would argue they would need more access. I know they highly desire mounted systems in their classroom spaces to be able to share information very easily. So I think we've covered those in this plan, but what like, I don't believe most likely in a high school science room the smartboard is the right answer for that room, right? Their desire, most likely, again, shareholder input, but most likely they're like, we need as large as you can get, and clear, but we don't need to walk up and touch it. We probably need mobility to walk around with a device that allows us to interact with it beyond being tethered to a cable to the wall. And I believe that our plan addresses those things. those kinds of things.
If I may add just one small piece, there's a difference between the district technology plan and looking at the annual budgets that I received from Janet McNeil, Kate, Science Coordinator, for example. Materials and supplies, that list looks very different now. That list looks very different now than it did back in 2002. So in her, budget, there are probes, all right? There are, Ed Weiser has the rate monitors, and so that's technology that you're not going to see here. Okay, again, the point being, there are elements that are technological, that are in materials and supplies budgets, that won't be part of what you're hearing in the district piece.
Mr. Chairman.
I wanted to pick up on what Ms. Kershaw said is, in terms of how we deliver this message and this budget and this vision is really bringing it down to something that is touchable and fungible and something that we can sympathize with on a daily basis. One great example, my son is in 6th grade, so big step up in homework. And one day we're asking him working on a project, when is it due? He said, I don't know. And so he proceeds to text all his friends about when this thing's due. Of course, he gets 2 responses, and lo and behold, they're all wrong about when it's due. So the first thing I thought about, shouldn't every single teacher doing a certain subject has a portal where you could just go in there and say, okay, what's due, when is it, and so on and so forth? That's so obvious.
Yes.
And so obviously, to me, that's one great example where if everybody does that, for that thing to work seamlessly, you need to have all the plumbing in place. So having those kind of examples, to me, really brings it to life, because a lot of people are saying, you can't do that? That's ridiculous. So that's kind of my idea as to how to bring this thing into, real-life examples where these are the things that we can't even do at this point.
So what I'm whispering over here is, so we shared with senior staff a few weeks back about examples. And some of the examples, we had one first grade teacher, I believe it was, she created a video to send to her students before school started that took the kids on this virtual tour of the classroom.
What a great idea.
Yeah, because she talked about the anxiety that kids have as they come to school. Another very quick example in terms of student learning, Ms. Stone, this has been an area of interest for you for a long time, and that is around learning programming. There's a simple application called Scratch where students actually created a movie, a storyboard by programming, thank you, in order for that. So not only does it emphasize the Odyssey and them learning about that, but then it teaches them some simple skills of programming. And so I appreciate your example there. And I think what's interesting for us is to be clear on what the presentation is, for whom, of course, when, right? So we've got examples we can show you. We have future examples about here. We've got a budget there, a scary-looking budget in terms of the, right? And so it's very helpful for us to hear, as you said, Ms. Kershaw. So when this is pitched, what we need to show is, and we appreciate the question and the request, because we've got it.
Yeah. Well, and what is exciting is there are these great pockets of things that people are doing. We want to be able to take all those to scale. And, but I think but you're right, those are concrete examples that help people to understand what it is that we're talking about. And that is important.
Now, Ms. Ditkoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll just echo it's great to be here. Thanks. So I think, and maybe this is just picking up on that last example, I think the piece that would be helpful in framing it is not the high-level vision of the 7 big principles, which I think we have, and then there's a lot of we need X number of servers stuff, but it's that stuff in the middle, and that's a technical term, right? Of
Highly
of
technical.
how does this all hang together, and what will we be able to do and be as a district that would be different from how we are now? So maybe a slightly heretical point of view, I have zero interest in predicting 2019. I think we won't be able to do it. I mean, good luck, have
Yeah,
fun, but
no.
I think our confidence level, our confidence interval is going to be, we're not going to know. And I'm almost never disagree with Ms. Stone, but I have almost little interest in, what does this look like when it's done? Because I don't think it is, right, it's a journey, not a destination. So I guess where I'm trying to sort of figure out what that middle, again, that stuff in the middle is that there's some amount of basic catch-up that we have to do, because we don't have, projection in every, we don't have if we don't have a laptop in every room, we don't have a projector in every room, we don't have wireless in every building. Like, there's just a basic level, if every kid can't access the internet at home, doesn't have it, there's some basic level of stuff that if you don't have it, forget about all those great ideas, because you're not going to get them anyway. And so I think that would be really helpful to understand of just what's the basic infrastructure that we need, and maybe that's just the fundamental technology. And it's going to be a mixture of hardware and software, and it'll be a mixture of capital and operating. But there's just the basic building blocks we need. But then it strikes me that trying to sort out, here's how education in this district would be better and interesting things we could build on, that's what I think will get people really excited. So if you were to say, look, we've got a range of learners, and for our special education learners, there are unbelievable advances in assistive technologies, and here's what that could really look like for a kid. And for our advanced learners who are really into Star Wars, you can actually watch live space probes happening in your classroom. And for kids who are in regular education, you could do rote drills on the machine, and then you get to actually spend class time with teachers who can teach in smaller groups that are more targeted to what you're struggling with, and you don't need to spend time. So, I have no idea if this is where we're going to go as a district, but that's the level of sort of the integrated vision of how is technology going to make the pedagogy more in an integrated way better for the students, that I feel like that piece is, at least in my mind, what's a little bit missing between the 7 high-level principles, which I like, and then the really detailed budget. But I think it's just that middle level of our strategic vision, or our strategic vision of assessment, right? You're not going to do weekly paper quizzes anymore. You're going to have something else, which is going to, and then the teacher's going to get that data back, and based on it, you're going to get a different quiz. Not everybody has to be taking the exact same quiz, right? It's not everybody has the same apps on their iPhone. Everybody can take a different quiz every Friday. It's actually not that hard, because, it's hard to start up and get there, but once you're there, it's not that hard to maintain something like that. Or, teacher collaboration stuff. If you want wikis on what are the best ways to teach struggling learners in this area, or what are the best ways to teach, advanced in this area, there's actually teacher-enabled collaborations, and so I think just showing people, from to, in terms of here's what we're trying to accomplish. We all agree this is our strategy and what we're trying to accomplish, and just some ways that this will be able to either more efficiently, although I'm not as interested in that, but more effectively educate our kids, allow teachers to collaborate, communicate with, parents, whatever. I guess it's just that's the piece that I feel like I'm missing a little bit. So it isn't just the one-off examples. That's not what I'm asking for. It's more that middle level of connectivity of the why we're doing this and how it will help us get to our core objectives better. Because again, it's not just about the devices. It's not about technology replacing teachers. It's not about any of that. It's about how do you actually use technology to augment and make instruction very different and far stronger. So again, if we're not going to go in any of those directions, that's okay, but I feel like that's the piece that I'm missing.
So let me say two things. First of all, there's a great deal of that exists in the documents that have been prepared by the group that's been spending most of their time on this. We made some choices tonight about what to bring here for a first conversation. So that's first, and a lot of it exists, and a lot more will exist by the time we get there on, I think it's December 4th. Not tomorrow night. It won't be tomorrow night. You won't, if you come here, you won't actually see that presentation tomorrow.
And with all due respect, as the co-chairman of the Override Study Committee, I'm far more interested in what this group thinks of it, right, than they do. I mean, yes, this is important, but like
Yeah.
nailing this
Sure.
piece to me.
Sure, and
seems-
but we've used the same model here.
Right.
We came before this group last week to sort of try this out, right? And we came here tonight to sort of try this out. The second thing is, and Dr. Fisher-Mueller really said it in her comments earlier, there is no part of this that is about replacing teachers with machines.
Are we, I don't see any more hands. I have Ms. Cox, okay.
And I think the last time I asked a question, I didn't get to say how excited I am that we're having this conversation. So I'm very excited that we're looking at the future of technology in our schools. And I was also interested in your talking about really wanting to invite in the stakeholders, and I was wondering if there's a process that you've developed to solicit the feedback of the teachers who've been using devices, we now know in 2 schools at least, for at least a year, sometimes 2 or 3. How are they involved in the development of this?
Well, yeah, so in general, so in each building is an educational technology specialist. I tell them regularly that they are ideally the poster child for technology in that building, and that their job is to develop cultures of use. So they are probably one of my most reliable direct feedbacks on a regular basis. Teachers are frustrated with this. They can't do such and such. When are we going to do this? Where's this? When's that come, right? So there's that avenue there. When it comes to the actual planning, this document and everything else is, are we prepared to move in the direction that we need to move? The actual movement is kind of distilled down to what I call the next steps planning process. And that's an annual activity that we engage in the spring. And one of the first steps is, well, what's our existing inventory? What are our existing liabilities? What is of the age to be replaced? We need to, is it equipment that we still need in those places, or are we looking to make shifts because things have changed since they were put in place? So we usually start there, and then we try to talk about where we want to go and what the new needs are. Unfortunately, the budget in the past hasn't really allowed for much more than meeting just existing liabilities that needed to be replaced with some shifting, but not necessarily the innovation necessary to move forward where people have said. So it wouldn't be uncommon to hear previously, and I remember principals, well, I don't really feel like I have a technology budget. And it's because it's spent before, it's spent in ways just to meet things before they even have an idea that they want to hopefully explore. But the challenge has been, how can you explore? You can't throw out certain things just to go off after something new, right? You're trying to balance, you can't just have a laptop in the hands of the teachers and then be like, okay, 8 years later, well, they still have a laptop, right? We want to go do this and just be distracted by the next latest and greatest. So it's this constant balance. And so I see a elaborated version of that. And one of the things, because what we try to do is within that allotment, we try to provide for them a share of what our life cycle support is or what our technology funds are, so that they and try to be consistent over time. So we try to trend it. So even if they're only, let's say, you have $30,000 this year, if you're already at the limits of that $30,000, you're already thinking around, well, what's my $30,000 move next year, because I have that amount ongoing. So we're looking, not 5 years out, but you're looking a couple years out while you're making initial moves at one time as well. And then there are inputs into that around what teachers are hoping for and looking to do. is one.
Right, I mean, I think that really focuses on maybe the technical requirements, but more in terms of the experience of the teachers and what they're discovering as they're using it, what their successes are, what their frustrations are, what they see about the potential, what advice they have on some of the leaves on the tree. I'm just wondering if there's any sort of process for visiting with those teachers and allowing them the opportunity to give that feedback from their direct classroom experience.
Like I said, direct, like I'm not, could be. There's nothing, there isn't any reason why we can't. Most of it right now is filtered through to me from my people in the field. As well as requests for, we try to pull in the PT, all the external funding sources and where they are. We try to pull them in so we're knowledgeable about what they are and make sure that we're in agreement that those are the right directions and will fall within the larger umbrella. So we do have a heartbeat on what it is, but not necessarily, and I think a pretty good heartbeat, but not focus grouped.
But Scott,
right now.
the process that's laid out here that you described earlier
Yeah.
Around innovation will, as I understood the way it was described to me, will formalize that,
Yes.
right? So as schools have dollars for teachers to utilize in innovative ways, there's a process for gathering that spelled out in this plan, for gathering that feedback from those people and seeking to look at whether things are working, seeking whether certain things should be taken to scale. It's seed money, if you will, and the people would be involved in that. One of the criteria, I think, if we model the way we've done most of this, they would provide feedback on what they're doing, and a replication for other people.
Ms. Chair.
Just to finish, just
Go
because I
ahead.
think we do have the opportunity of having had those schools that have already started into this, and it would be great to be able to spread what they've learned. So glad to hear that there is a process or a way that they could do that.
Ms. Chalupsky?
Well, I too didn't get a chance to congratulate you on coming up with this proposal and the numbers behind it and all that. I think it's really a long time overdue. But my question, and I see that Kevin Stokes is here too, so I might even ask him, is about the internet. And is there any towns or cities in the United States that have free internet for all its residents? You come in the borders of the town, you have free internet? Does that exist? No. Okay, all right. I was just thinking that's a way to solve the problem without, give everybody extra $10 on their tax bill and do it for the whole town, and people would be thrilled.
So I've been thinking, I have a few questions that are really designed not to be answered now, but which I thought possibly would be useful as you go on with your presentation. So they are the following that I'm kind of imagining might be in some people's heads as we go, particularly to the Override Study Committee. One is, and you've touched on it a couple of times, if we accomplish all this, are there any savings in our budget elsewhere that will occur as a result of it? I think I saw you nodding regarding textbooks and that kind of thing, and I don't know whether it might be useful to acknowledge that with the Override Study Group, because I think they're interested in things like that. Another general question is, what would the implications for us and our system be if we weren't able to do this? How would it impact the quality of of what we're delivering in terms of education? And then the flip side of that would be, what are we going to gain, or what are our students going to gain by doing it? How will all of their education and their learning be benefited? And finally, and maybe, Peter, you've already done this yesterday, and I didn't really realize it, but what part of this is it really operations budget, and one part of it is capital budget? And I will just add that I, too, very much appreciate the opportunity to begin to really cope with this with you all, and thank you very much. I can't even imagine how complex it was to begin to put this together, and I appreciate it very, very much, and I suspect everybody here does too. So thank you.
Thank you.
Just on that last piece, I do want to say that that's still in process. That's still an open question that we're talking with Mr. Cronin about, and we'll continue to as we try to really refine this budget.
Well, let me just
yeah.
respond. I think it's very important that people understand that when you give this presentation
But,
then.
Yeah, we think it's important that we understand it, actually. So.
No, but I just
we're-
mean understand
No,
that
no,
it's
I-
still
no,
in process.
No,
Yeah.
I hear
Okay.
you. And that's, what we're still working on is what are the definitions and what's been traditionally part of the capital improvement plan versus in this world, what could become part of the capital improvement plan. We have some work to do.
Right. Fine.
With Mr. Cronin. I just want to, there's one question I just want to say, address part of, and it's your question about what if we can't do this. I have real concerns if we're not able to do this, just from what I've seen, what's been described to me by people in teaching and learning in our technology areas, what I've seen with some teachers doing. To me, more and more every day, it's an equity issue of what some people are able to do, what some people are currently mounting in their own classrooms, right? Or bringing in because it's an issue of being able to attract and retain teachers.
Aha.
Because
I
over the
believe
last
that.
2 or 3 years in particular,
Yep.
our principals are reporting to us that the attitude of the newer people they're hiring
Right.
is essentially, here's the technical term, are you kidding me? When they walk into the classrooms that they're asked to work in, compared to what they're seeing in other districts that are offering them employment.
Yep.
So I worry about even the small possibility that we're not able to do this, both from what our students are able to access, from what they're able to do at home. A lot of the examples described and many more that I watch my 16-year-old engage in every night and know what's happening that's so different in those classrooms as a result of the initiative that Beverly put in place 3 years ago. And in terms of the equity issues in schools where PTOs have been able to work with Scott and their principals and what they're able to do there, and they're not able to do in some other schools. So I think it's a major issue that you've hit upon.
And I think it's very important with that kind of passion that the Override Study Committee understand that. Yes. Ms. Stone.
If I could just echo what Ms. Dudkoff said about, I'm actually much more concerned with how this committee is responding to the need to finance a plan like this than I am about the Override Study Committee, because the question, given what Dr. Lupini has just said, and certainly reflected in all of our comments, it's our job to figure out how we're going to do this.
Yep.
And as we are going through a budget priorities exercise, and we'll be very shortly going through the actual budgeting exercise, I think we're going to need to have much deeper, more specific conversations about what we're willing to give up in order to have this start to take shape in a real way. And I also think it would really behoove us to take a look at districts. I mean, it sounds like you know a number of districts that are doing things that we would like to be doing. And my question is, if those are public school districts in the state of Massachusetts, how are they financing it?
Right.
and what does it look like? And so if that's something that the Finance Subcommittee can do, great. If it's something that is built into the way you're looking at budgeting for this, great. But I think that those are things that this committee needs to be looking at and not waiting for the Override Study Committee to ask those questions. Those are questions we
I'm sure Mr. Moore and Mr. Stokes know many more districts than I. I mean, I know a number of examples, a little bit about what they did in terms of financing. There are pieces of what they're doing that I think we've incorporated here. I think this is a more comprehensive plan than some of them have developed, and I think that's a good thing. So I'll go like this and speak for them and say, you know, what may be different in terms of this topic for the Override Study Committee and this process is to come back here more often, to come back here with some answers to some topics that have been raised tonight as we proceed on with a sort of a parallel course to the Override Study Group as well.
Well, thank you, really, very, very much. I think you've generated a lot of excitement here at the table, which is good. And I'll take the responsibility for us being 45 minutes late. I think it was well worthwhile. So with that, is there any new business that my colleagues would like to bring up? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.